Icerd stands for the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. It's one of the core United Nations conventions on human rights. It was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1965. And it contains a set of binding standards as regards racial discrimination. It's a fairly simple structure, but at least it does provide with a definition of racial discrimination based on race, color, descent, national or ethnic origin. Therefore, it's not fixated on the notion of race itself. Together with provisions on obligations, on special measures, on segregation and apartheid, on hate speech, on rights in general, on remedies, and on education. So it's a short instrument by United Nations standards, but nonetheless, it contains considerable norms of considerable importance in a fairly short space. If I could also say just very briefly that it was drafted in the period when decolonization of Western empires in particular was unfolding, and in the teeth of the international struggle against apartheid. And if you read the preamble to the convention, you'll find that context, I think, very, very clearly laid out for you. When the convention was adopted, many of the states that gave the convention their initial support argued that racial discrimination was something that occurred essentially in Western empires and under the apartheid system, but did not apply domestically. And certainly one of the efforts of the committee over the years, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, has been to persuade states that it is also a domestic matter and encourage them to examine carefully the composition of their population by providing disaggregated data, and also examine carefully the state of their legislation and practice to see if it should be adjusted to the requirements of the convention, which it inevitably is. The committee constantly emits, I think, a stream of recommendations to states, large and small, as to ways in which their law and practice can and should be adjusted to meet the requirements of the convention. Impact hasn't been comprehensively studied, but certainly one of the key areas of the impact of any of these conventions is not just to engage with the state, but also to make sure that civil society knows about the convention. There's no doubt that civil society is much more aware of the convention than it had been in previous eras. The committee is much more receptive, I think, to input from civil society. And in many ways, the committee is considerably dependent upon that information to contrast the information provided by states. But there's no doubt, again, over the years that many changes in legislation and practice have been made. They continue to be made, and the committee will always press that they should be made further. No one is perfect. There's always something more to do in that area.